Okay, so welcome. I'm going to get started here. I think at the moment we have about as many speakers as we do students, but hopefully more students will be logging in as we come along. And also we are now recording this. That's why you should have just seen the continue button on your Zoom. And so those of you who are coming in late or people want to watch it later, we're going to post this on the website sometime in the next week or so. So welcome. My name is Marjorie Olmstead. I am the undergraduate faculty advisor and also the associate chair for undergraduate affairs. And I'm delighted to host today our annual career panel. And this is aimed at students who are looking for a job directly out with their bachelor's. Those of you who are interested in graduate school, we have a presentation on that in November. Actually, right now it's last year's that's up on the website, and this has reminded me that I need to get this year's up as well. And so I will do that soon. But meanwhile, this is aimed at people who are earning your bachelor's in physics and trying to figure out, wait a minute, what comes next? And most of what I'm going to have in the next 10 minutes or so is actually taken from the National Society of Physics Students website. They have a whole lot of wonderful information there, and you can find links to most of this information there, except for the very first slide. This comes from you guys. Those of you who have applied to graduate know that we ask that you fill out a form before we will actually file your graduation application. And your physics bachelor's, we ask you, what is the probability that you're going to be doing any of these things a year from now? And almost everybody's probabilities add up to something well over 100%. If you feel like, wait a minute, I have no idea what I want to do, you are not alone. What you see here, the intensity of the color is whether somebody was 100% sure they were going to do something all the way down to 0. And what you can see is that many people have not necessarily a great idea of what they're doing next, but for at least half of our students, they think they're at least 50% likely to go and get a job. And so that's what today is aimed at, is to look at this process by which you start looking for a job. And don't panic. It may take a little while, but there is a job out there for you. Nationally, physics majors have a very low unemployment rate. And just as you're thinking, oh, what in the world can I do? I just want to take a couple of minutes for you to think about what you can do before you even start your job search. One is just, what can you imagine yourself doing? Are there things that you really like to do? Are there skills that you enjoy using? Do you love to code? Do you never want to see Python again? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What can you just say, you know what? I'd really like to get paid to do this. And then you say, well, so where can I get paid? And so starting to do research on what are places that actually hire people to do what you enjoy doing and what you're good at. And don't just look at current job openings, but research the places that do the kinds of things that you want to do. Look into what your dream job might be, and you're probably not qualified for it yet. But look at the application requirements and say, all right, so how in the next 5 or 10 years can I get that on my resume so that I can get my dream job? And then another thing, when you really don't feel like doing quantum mechanics, is you can say, well, how can I prepare myself to market myself so that those people will actually pay me to do what I want to do? And keep your resume up to date. Think about what might go into a cover letter. Curate your online presence. If you've posted some things you don't really want a future boss to see, now is the time to take them down. And also prepare your elevator pitch. Think about when you just meet a neighbor who's got the job you would love to have your 30-second and 2-minute explanation of what you're good at and why you might want to work at their company, or can they direct you to some place to get where you want to go, which summarizes it all in network. So that's just sort of my overview. And now you'll hear a lot more about that from our speakers. So physics jobs are all over the place. Then they span the economy. This is data from the American Physical Society, American Institute of Physics, and about half of physics bachelors are employed about a year out. And of those who are employed, about 2/3 of those are in the private sector, but other people are in the military or at a national lab or working at a college or teaching high school. Within those 2/3 that are in the private sector, about 2/3 of those have a job that might be called engineer or computer or data analyst. Note that only about 3% of people reported a job that was actually called physicist or astronomer, but also only about 5% report that they never solved technical problems. So what that means is you're going to be out there solving problems for the world, not necessarily specifically physics, but as you'll see in another slide, about 3/4 of those who have engineering type jobs say that they actually do use physics or astronomy on a regular basis. That's this slide. So they ask students, what jobs, what skills and knowledge do you actually use in your job? And what you can see is that the most common thing is to solve a technical problem, followed very closely by working on a team. And so, yeah, those you probably expected. The one that many of you don't really think about is the next in line is technical writing. So those of you who keep putting off your W credit saying, why do I need to take all those classes? The answer is because you're going to need to coherently describe what you're doing to somebody else, and that's technical writing. Computing, programming is of course very important if you have a programming job, but about 3/4 of students in engineering type jobs also do a lot of programming. And working with clients is another one. So there's all kinds of skills. And one thing that you'll notice is that you tend to learn these particular skills in your laboratory classes and in research and on engineering teams and in internships. So don't spend all your time in the classroom. Make sure you take advantage of all these other things while you're here at the university. Physicists get paid pretty well. Typical starting salaries are 40 to 60K. What these are here, it depends on whether you're in the private sector or teaching high school. The blue bar in the middle is the 25 to 75% range for students who graduated about 3 years ago. And then the whiskers and these bar and whisker plots is the full range that was reported when people filled out the AIP survey. And one thing though to keep in mind is that just because a job doesn't pay as well in dollars doesn't mean that it's not a better job for you and in what you're trying to get out of life. It may have better benefits, better work environment, better hours. If you can't afford to live close to where you're working and you're going to have to commute for 3 hours, then remember to include that in your dollars per hour when you're calculating your salary and things like that. So yes, salary is important. You want to be able to survive, but remember to take into account other things as well. Who hires physics bachelors? This is a list the AIP put together of people, places in the state of Washington that had hired physics majors. And so chances are those people graduated from the University of Washington, and it ranges from places that you've definitely heard of and expect to hire physicists like Boeing or Tableau, but you'll also see places, things that you've never heard of, but they still have physicists that are hired there. And also don't forget government, the Navy, the Washington State Department of Transportation, institutes for environmental health and so forth here on campus. There's lots of different places where physicists work. And the kind of job title you have, it will be something like a process engineer or a research technician, a high school science teacher, software engineer. There's lots of different titles that students have as well. So where can you learn about all this? As I mentioned at the beginning, I got most of this information from SPS National, the National Society of Physics Students. Their career resources tab is very useful. I recommend you go look at their careers toolbox and see what they have to offer. Actually, this morning I watched some of their webinars, and they hired someone who was actually very good at giving a good overview of how to put things together. Those bullet points I had in the early slide, a lot of those came from her talk. And she also has a very good talk about preparing for and going through an interview and setting up networks. There, you'll see advice on how to put together a resume with things that a physicist actually has. You don't put, I took physics 334 on your resume. You put, I know how to hook up a circuit. And how do you change things that a physicist has and turn it into a bullet point on your resume? What are the sorts of things to think about and to bring up? And also they have something called SPS Jobs, which is a place to upload your resume as well. The American Physical Society also has a careers page. It tends to be aimed more at people with a graduate degree in physics, whereas the Society of Physics Students is aimed more at undergraduates coming out. The AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, also has a very good career resources that's in general for STEM careers. You'll hear about the UW Career and Internship Center in just a minute from Dan Poe. And then you have all these other resources, alumni and so forth, and you're going to hear from a few of them today as well. So with that, I'll close, take a few questions. You're welcome to put something in the chat or raise your hand, and then I will turn the floor over, actually right on time, it's going to be 5:15, to Dan Poe from the UW Career and Internship Center, who's going to talk a little bit about what options they have for you. And then also introduce our panel, which includes one alumnus who graduated back 30 years ago and is now a president and chief optical engineer who hires undergraduates, and then 3 students who were in your shoes not very long ago and have recently just gone through the job search process. So at this point, I'll break and take questions, either by raising your hand or going in the chat. Anybody there? Marie?
Yes, hi. I see that a lot of physics grads have job titles with engineer in the title, but to my understanding, many engineering jobs require an ABET accredited engineering degree in order to do them. So I'm wondering what the interaction is there, or like whether I even have the right idea with the idea that having a physics degree rather than an engineering degree limits the space of jobs that are accessible to you because of that.
There are a few jobs that will specifically require accreditation, but most jobs, the trick is just getting past HR. Most of them, a physicist, or especially someone in our applied track who's taken a bunch of lab and computing courses and has a few engineering courses under their belt. Some of our panelists will talk about that later, but yes, physicists do get these jobs, and the trick is to just, as I said, make sure your resume will get past some of the initial screening, but most entry-level jobs are not necessarily at the point of actually having the official professional engineering accreditation. That's something that people tend to acquire while they're on the job. So yes, it is possible to get those jobs, and going to engineering career fairs and talking to people so that your resume can bypass some of those computers that are looking specifically for an engineering degree is something that you want to keep in mind.
All right, thank you.
Are there other questions? All righty, if that's the case, then I will stop sharing my screen and say hello to you all. And actually, I guess briefly, maybe I'll just introduce all of our panelists so that you know what to hang out for and wait. and then I will turn the floor over to Dan from the Career Services Center. So Dan, where are you? You want to wave and say hello so you come to the top?
Hi, I'm Dan Pooks. I work in the Career Center. My pronouns are he and him.
Okay. Ned? You're muted.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Ned.
Okay. Ryan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan. I'm a teacher here in Hawaii.
Samir?
Hi, everyone. I'm Samir. I'm an engineer here in Seattle, startup.
Great.
Pronoun
And
he.
Ellie? Sorry.
That's all good.
Hey guys, I'm Ali. I work in Redmond as an acoustic engineer, graduated back in 2020.
Great. Thank you. So now those 5 people should be at the front of your Zoom because they've just made noise. So that was the main reason I did this. So now I'm going to turn the floor over to Dan, and he's going to tell you all the cool things that the Career and Internship Center has to offer.
Thank you, Marjorie. I really appreciate it. Going after you because your presentation was so detailed about physics specifically. My presentation is going to be much more general. I kind of want to manage people's expectations in that regard. Because we are generalists in the Career Center and we work with students who are interested in careers in all different kinds of fields and all different kinds of programs. And so what I'm going to do today is really briefly walk you through a couple of tools that we provide on our website or through appointments with coaches that could help you really figure out what your next steps are, whatever those things may be, whether that's a job, to decide if you want to go to grad school, or whether that's something that you want to do and grad school is not really in your future, at least in the short term. We're here to help you work through all those options and explore options that maybe you haven't even thought of before. And I think one of the things I really took away from Marjorie's presentation was that people who have degrees in physics are working in lots and lots and lots of different settings, and they're using a certain skill set in lots of different ways. And that's really the basis of the work that we do in the Career Center and how we approach the work that we do. For most students, they could apply their skills in lots of different settings. This makes what we do look somewhat linear, and it's not always linear. It can sometimes be messy. It can sometimes be like a game of chutes and ladders where you go up and then you go back down again, and then you have to go back up again. But we really help students with each part of this career development process, from figuring out what it is they really want to do to how to build the skills and get the experience and build the relationships to help get them there. And then when they're ready, whether it's applying for a job or applying for a graduate school or applying for an internship, we help them tell their story through their resume, through their cover letter, through a personal statement, through an interview, so that they can find success and land the job or the internship that they're most interested in. But it's not necessarily a linear process. It's an exploratory process. And sometimes it can go in fits and starts. So we want to normalize that for all the students who are here today. So that first one, really about finding purpose, I'm going to paste a couple of links into the chat as we go today to some resources on our website. And the first one is a resource that we provide called Pathway U, which I think is a great place to start because it's a series of assessments that you can take if you have about 90 minutes. And they ask you about a number of things. They ask you about your interests. They ask you about your values. They ask you about your personality. And they ask you about your workplace preferences. And then they map your responses to these questions to a massive database powered by the Department of Labor, where they've asked the same questions to millions of people in thousands of jobs. And they map your responses to their responses. And so then they can show you a list of jobs in a whole bunch of different fields that might actually be quite a good fit. And again, some of these might have been jobs that you might have thought about before. Others might be jobs that you hadn't thought about before. And that's what's so exciting about this tool to me, is that it can help reveal to students career paths that might have been adjacent to a path that they thought that they were on, but this adjacent path might actually be a better fit for them in terms of those interests, values, personality, workplace preferences. So it's a great tool. You are certainly welcome to take advantage of it. Every UW student and staff member has access to this assessment. We don't like to call them tests. They're more like tools, right? They can help illuminate for you options that you might have considered and options that you might not have. And that can also help you begin to articulate what it is that you're looking for, as well as what it is that you have to provide, what kind of value you can bring to an organization. Another way that we help students get connected and stay connected both before as well as after they graduate is through a whole host of interest communities that we provide students. I'm going to show you an example of one of those right now. We have one that's specifically geared towards students who are interested in the physical and the life sciences. And so if you can see my screen now, we have blog posts about upcoming research opportunities, forums, webinars, classes that are being offered. We also highlight jobs in the physical and life sciences through this jobs board here, and that can take you to a whole bunch of other positions that you might be interested in. And then we have a lot of other resources on here, like, for example, panel discussions that we've had with alumni, brief video interviews with people in a whole host of different fields, as well as some other great tools that are specific to the physical and life sciences. And so there's lots of resources on our interest communities, and you're welcome to affiliate with as many of them as you like. Some of them have some overlap. I manage the health interest community, and I also manage the physical and life sciences community. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of overlap between those two communities, and you can affiliate with as many of them as you like. You can also see on the right, we have a different set of affiliations. And students who are first generation, or students who identify as students of color, or students with disabilities are also able to affiliate with these communities and learn more about resources that are specifically targeted towards supporting students from those backgrounds. So there's lots of ways to help, identify people at UW who have similar interests or similar identities who you could network with. That's always a great place to start networking. Skill building can take place in a lot of different settings. And we always encourage students to reflect on what we hear back from the majority of employers about the kinds of skills that they're looking for. And we put them into a couple of categories here. We call them level up. You can see that employers are looking for people who can manage both themselves as well as others. And that's an interesting combination of both teamwork and leadership skills. They're also looking for people who can produce results. So you might want to reflect on how you can demonstrate these various qualities, because as we've heard, they are important to employers across sectors, across industries. Sometimes people call these sorts of things soft skills. That's not a term that I use anymore, not that I ever used it before. I think it sort of unintentionally undercuts the value of these skills. And what I always encourage students to consider, even if they're applying for technical positions, is that if other students have the technical skills, but they lack these so-called human skills, right? The ability to interact with other humans and be responsible for one's own career, then it might be these skills that help them land that job. It might be these skills that actually help them stand out in a crowded applicant pool where everybody's got the technical skills, but some of the students are lacking those behavioral skills. And so that's something that we always encourage students to include in their resume and in their cover letter, if that's something that they think is going to help them stand out. Another tool which we're really excited to debut for students this year through a grant from the Student Technology Fee was the ability to use a tool called LinkedIn Learning. LinkedIn is a professional networking platform, and that we're going to talk briefly about later in terms of how to use it for networking. But they also have thousands of short videos on a whole host of topics that are really relevant to lots of different aspects of this process. That can range from how to look for a job, to how to negotiate salary, to how to work in a multicultural work setting. There's lots of ways that you can use this tool as a way to build micro credentials on your LinkedIn profile. And so if you're looking to demonstrate to an employer that you have a certain skill set, going through a LinkedIn Learning course and then adding that sort of merit badge to your resume or to your LinkedIn profile is a great way to show employers that you've got the skills they're looking for, if those are skills that you're learning outside of the classroom setting. And oftentimes employers are just as interested in skills that students learn outside of the classroom as they are of the skills that students are learning inside the classroom. That's certainly been the case in the work that I've done. So other places to go to get experience, a lot of students are interested in getting internships. Sometimes students have convinced themselves that they've got to get an internship, and if they don't, it's just game over, and that's not the case at all. But if you're interested in getting an internship, we have lots of great resources to help support you in finding that internship, as well as making the most of the internship. One of my colleagues, who's also named Dan, is our internship success manager. And he works all the time helping students to find, reflect on, make the most of internships and use them as a springboard in their career. A lot of students assume a lot of internships must be unpaid. That's not the case at all. When I went into our Handshake database today to look for internships, I found that there were 491 of them. Let me stop sharing here for a moment. Oh, I think I can probably, is it right here? Yeah. There were 491 internships in Handshake that had the word physics in them. But when I selected for just show me the ones that are paid internships, it was 465, which means that the vast majority of internships that are related to physics in Handshake are paid, right? And I'm happy to delve a little bit deeper into that if that would be helpful as we move forward. So, Handshake is a great place to go to learn a lot about the kinds of opportunities that are out there. You can also learn a lot about people in Handshake, and I'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a little bit. We encourage students to aggressively use the filters in that system to be choosy, right? If geography is a factor for you, if you want to stay within 20 or 30 or 50 miles of Seattle, use that as a filter. The Handshake system that we rely upon is used by more than 1,000 universities all over the US. And so it's not just jobs here in Seattle, it's jobs all over the country and indeed all over the world. You can also, as we'll talk a little bit in a little while, you can use Handshake as a networking tool. And that's the next sort of piece in this process, is how to build relationships, both with other students as well as alumni who might be working in places that you might be interested in working someday. And there's a bunch of different platforms to do that. You can network with other students in Handshake. You can also take advantage of a new platform that we're encouraging students to consider that's run by the UW Alumni Association, and that's called Husky Landing. That's a relatively new platform. It's just been rolled out in the last 6 months. So as you can expect, there's not a lot of people in there right now, but we want you to help make that platform successful by adding your profile to it. We also encourage current and former students to aggressively use the LinkedIn platform and narrow their search to people who are UW alumni who are in LinkedIn. And the good news is that there's about 315,000 of them in LinkedIn. One of the things that I noticed today when I went in there was that there were 5,000 alumni with physics degrees in LinkedIn from the University of Washington. And you can further filter them by where they live, if you want, by where they work, if you want. You can also filter by the kinds of work that they do within their organizations. If you're interested in more of an engineering role, or you're interested more in a business development role. And you can also filter by what they said that they're good at, the kinds of skills that they bring to the position. So this is a great place to go to learn more about alums who are working in places that you might someday want to work in. And we can help you figure out how to find those people. We can also help you figure out how to approach them and what kinds of questions you might want to ask to really complement your job search process with some really strong networking. We think that networking helps make your job search process more effective because it helps you talk about yourself and what you're looking for. It helps you to talk about what kind of value you could bring to an organization. And it will also expose you to jobs and internships that never get posted on any job board anywhere. You know, Handshake is great, but Handshake doesn't have all the jobs and internships in the whole world. A lot of jobs never get posted to job boards. And so we want you to be looking all over for the kinds of opportunities that might be a good fit. Okay. Finally, I said we really help students with that storytelling piece, whether it's in their resume, whether it's in a cover letter, or whether it's in an interview. And we've been doing a lot of programming lately about how to help students excel in virtual interviews, because we feel like those are certainly the case right now for most interviews. And those might be a trend. Those might be something that we see more in the future as more organizations opt to use either synchronous or asynchronous video virtual interviewing technologies. And we can help you with each piece of this process in terms of how you tell your story on paper, but also how you tell your story in person or through a Zoom camera. A tool which we also offer students that's very helpful in this last regard is called Standout. And it's an online tool where you can record yourself and analyze your responses to common interview questions. It can help you identify distracting verbal or physical tics that you may be displaying in your interviewing. And it can help you hone your message and really communicate with confidence and clarity and concision through a virtual synchronous or asynchronous interview, which is not easy to do. You know, it's really not easy for your enthusiasm to come through in that tiny little Zoom camera. And so we spend a lot of our time with students helping them work on their interview technique. And we're happy to help you with that as well. So how to find success, where to go from here, what are some next steps? Well, I would encourage you to check out our virtual career fairs because they're going to be virtual for the foreseeable future. We're finding that a lot of employers really enjoy the virtual career fair format. And I don't know if many of you actually attended any of our in-person career fairs in the hub in previous years, but it's usually in a large ballroom. There's thousands of students there. It's hot, everyone's sweating, it smells kind of funny, and it's loud. And it's not really an ideal way for you to get to know any employers or for employers to get to know you. So we're finding that the kinds of one-on-one meetings that students can have in our virtual fairs, as well as some of the small group employer information sessions that they're able to offer, are really creating rich opportunities for students to interact with employers as they're exploring whether or not those would be a good fit. So I want to encourage you to lean in on these virtual fairs. I could understand why someone might have some skepticism about how effective it might be as a format, but we really want you to demonstrate through these fairs and how you participate in them that you will be a great employee or you will be a great intern, especially if the employership or the internship is virtual, which again, it might be depending on the position for some time. So we really want you to take advantage of these fairs and make them work hard for you. And the best way to do that is to sign up early and do your homework. So our spring fair, we just had our winter fair last week. And we had more than 75 employers there. We have our spring fair coming up on April 22nd. And so you'll be able, in the weeks prior to the fair, you'll be able to go online and learn more about the employers who are going to be there and look at some jobs they might have posted in Handshake or internships. And then you can really plan how you're going to use that fair as a way to learn more about some employers and hopefully also make a really good first impression. Because what we're also hearing from employers is that these fairs and these one-on-one meetings that they're having with students are now really the beginning of the interview. Whereas in the past, it was much more about just getting to know a person. So as I said earlier, if you're interested in applying to graduate school, we can also help you with that part of the process. We can help students with their resumes, writing a personal statement, which is really a variation on a cover letter. We can also help you with interviews if the programs that you're applying for have an interview as part of their selection process. And we have people who can talk with you more about law school, health programs, as well as other graduate programs. So how to connect with us moving forward. We've got a ton of great DIY resources on our website that really correspond with each one of these areas. So if you want to see some resume samples, or you want to look at what an undergraduate CV looks like for someone with a physics background, you can just click on that Tell Your Story icon, and it will take you right to a whole bunch of examples of things like resumes and cover letters. You're also welcome to schedule an appointment with me or any of my colleagues in the Career Center. And the best place to do that is just to go on our Handshake system, and you can see you have that Jobs tab on the left. You want to go all the way over to that Career Center tab on the right. Connect with the experts. I think they should put the word experts in quotation marks there, because I think that Marjorie and some of the alumni panelists who you've got here today are really the experts in as far as what are your next steps in your career that involves physics. We're generalists, as I said earlier. But we have appointment types of all manners that I've described here earlier today, and you can choose to meet with us to talk about any of these things, whether it's more of at an exploratory level, or whether it's really about, I want to tune up my LinkedIn profile, or I've got an interview coming up for an internship and I want to prepare for the interview. We can help you with any and all of these things. Here's me and my colleagues on the coaching team. And we also have a whole team of folks who work on our employer support and engagement side of things, where they're getting employers in front of students and helping to organize our fairs and helping to organize employer-led information sessions. So I hope this has been helpful. I've covered a lot of ground very quickly, but I hope it's been helpful, and I'm happy to stick around and answer a couple of additional questions before I head out to make dinner for my kids.
Great, thank you very, very much. That was really informative. And if you email me your slides, then I'll make them available to students later.
Happy to do so.
Great. So are there a couple of quick questions for Dan? You can put something in the chat or raise your hand or just speak up.
I have a question. It's not very well thought through, but okay. I've been to some of the in-person fairs, but not a virtual one yet. And oftentimes these companies, they will send like ambassador representative type people that will collect resumes and will tell you, oh, this is, I'm not the one to talk to get the job. You go apply to the company's website. I'm just gonna take this resume and put it in a pile. And that's kind of discouraging in the sense that I don't really have like good questions to ask right on the fly when meeting these representatives, because I'm just learning about the company. And there's no like mutual exchange of like, you know, I don't know where it goes from there if I'm just going to a database online. So how do I attend these events and sort of heighten like that connection, find a way to make sure that it's solid, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. And you're right. Oftentimes these fairs can feel very transactional. And it can also just feel like, you know, I just gave that person my resume and they just put it in a giant stack of resumes. I think what would be helpful maybe in terms of this question is to think about the fair as separate and distinct from the application process, and how you could use the fair as a place to learn more about an employer, but not learn about them for the first time, right? I mean, that's why we encourage students to really do their homework and research employers before the fair, so they can come to the fair with questions that are informed by the research that they've already done, such that they can learn more about opportunities that this organization might have that might be a good fit with them, or how to demonstrate that fit. So for example, you know, if you were to go to a fair and say, I noticed that you had this internship on Handshake and it said it's looking for XYZ, how can I show that I have XYZ would be a great question to ask of a recruiter at the fair. Because you're right, that's not necessarily part of the interview, although it might be really a screening process that the employer is using for an interview, but it might also just be your chance to learn more about them before you apply. That's how I would encourage you to use that time. But I do want to acknowledge the fact that you said, you know, that it does oftentimes feel very impersonal, and that might even be magnified in a virtual setting. So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. That really helps. I often just ask about the workplace and not really think about the right questions to ask, I guess, but this will inspire me. Thank you. Well,
good. And I encourage you to ask about the workplace too, because I think that's really important. You know, that was one of those 4 assessments that's part of the Pathway U, is your workplace preferences. And oftentimes, this has been my case, that those workplace preferences have a bigger impact on your overall job satisfaction and your happiness than what you're doing all day. So it's good that you're asking about that. Thank you for your question. Yeah.
Great. So are there more questions here for Dan? If not, then I'd like to thank you for working late and coming. And like your slides look wonderful and your talk as well. So thank you very much. It's a great resource.
I'll send the slides over to you tomorrow, Marjorie. Have a good evening. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye now.
Okay, so now I think I'd like to turn the floor over. I think probably Ned, since you've got more experience as hiring people like the 3 who are then our other 3 speakers, if you want to talk for a little bit, and then we'll open up with the panel from our more recent graduates.
Sure. Again, my name is Ned Destorvik, and I run a company here on the, I guess, northeast side in Woodinville called Seattle Photonics. And much like Marjorie showed earlier, you know, I sort of fall into that auspice of being an engineer now versus a physicist, whereas my title is really just a senior optical engineer now. It's kind of a long road that got me here, I guess, and I'm sure every one of you has experienced your own road just getting your physics degrees, let alone your life past that. But that all being said, just let me give you a quick history of how I landed here, and maybe how that will apply to how you guys should look for a job. So I got my undergraduate degree there, obviously at the UW. And in my last year, I actually took the optics lab class and completely fell in love with it. And the funny thing, or the sad thing, I guess, for you folks right now is that you don't get to take those lab classes. which is really too bad, or much harder in any event, in terms of prospective employees' perspectives of you, because they want to be able to see like tangible hands-on in a lot of cases. But that being said, I fell in love with that class so much that I decided to go get a master's degree in optics, just because there wasn't enough optics at the UW at the time. And that sort of springboard into getting a job in San Diego, working for Hughes Aircraft, which is now long gone. And then I went to one other job where I actually sat next to one of the guys who actually wrote the book on what's called modern optical engineering, an old guy who has passed away since then, and then moved to Seattle. Actually worked at Microvision, which was on, again, I think it was on Marjorie's list as well. And then I started my own company, just started consulting with them, and then grew that from there. Optics specifically is a really burgeoning, growing field where when I started out was maybe 10% of the work that was being done was commercial, where there were photographic objectives and potentially microscope objectives. And then the other 90% of the engineers in that field were working for defense. So they're making telescopes that were spying on bad people and making missiles and all this other stuff. And so that's all really turned on its head. And I would argue and suggest to you that only about 10% of the optics people now actually work in government defense related activities. And most of it's in commercials. Your cell phone has, I don't know how many different optical components in it now, between the camera and between the display. And now you're going to get LiDAR, your new cameras that are coming out. So it's really a burgeoning field. And actually, Seattle's a great place now. It used to be a desert wasteland of optics, but it's in fact now really a burgeoning optics community as well, with HoloLens springing out of Microsoft. Your Kinect is fundamentally a massively optical interface device. We have all these new space companies springing up around here, around SpaceX and stuff like that. So if you're really into space sciences in particular, this is actually a wonderful community as well. And certainly the biotech stuff that's sort of come out of Paul Allen and Bill Gates and some of the funding that they've done with intellectual ventures and the Brain Sciences Group. And there's just a ton of that stuff here as well. So in terms of a community, it's really a wonderful community too for physicists to find employment in. So that being said, now I've had the luxury of hiring a handful of physicists, particularly from UW, mostly because I'm jaded and biased, knowing what a good program it is. There's no kickback involved any longer from UW, so that's all in jest, but it is a good program. And I think the point that I think Marjorie pointed out in her slides and specifically is that employers know that physicists like to solve problems, or at least we hope you like to solve them, but that you're at least very good at it. And that physicists have enough of a broad range of skill set that you can sort of plug them into all these different applications or endeavors or problems and have a good likelihood of success that they'll figure their way out of it. Whether it's optics centric like me, or whether it's, designing the next toaster, or looking at biology and in terms of how to extract DNA out of things like that, and understanding a wide array of topics easily. And then the thing that goes hand in hand with that is really just your sort of, what I hope is like hands-on and getting your hands dirty and wanting to tinker with stuff and wanting to play with things and taking motorcycles apart when you're a kid, or taking your ballpoint pen and redesigning how the spring goes in there. I mean, it's funny in the sense that we as employers look to see that people are curious and that people want to understand how things work. And we want to take that natural curiosity and understanding of the physical world and stick you in a place that's going to be helpful to them and get their job done. So, so when you come in with your resume, I think the one thing I really want to hammer home here is that whatever's on that resume, you better damn well be sure to be able to explain what that is specifically. And so if you say, hey, I worked on, Roger's cool atomic trap, atom trap, you really need to be able to explain, what did you do on that? How did that work? Because when you talk to someone, they're not going to know anything about you. And all they really have is typically this piece of paper and what you tell them. They're not going to expect you as a fresh graduate to understand all the intricacies of the program that they're working on, because you are new at what you're doing. So they're only really, their source of trying to get information from you is really going to be on your resume. And so whatever you put on there is usually a quick flag for them to be able to ask questions about you, to see what your understanding of the material is, and really glean from you what your engagement in that is. So if you put something on your resume, really be able to go into detail as much as you can, explaining, you know, what you did, what were the results, how did you solve any problems, and even if there was a problem along the way in that work that you did in your resume, explain what that problem was and how you solved it. And that process actually means a lot to an employer, to show that you went through these sort of mental gyrations to get to a solution that was beneficial to you. So I really think that's a very important thing. And then I think the other thing that Marjorie brought up and Dan did as well is your communication skills. So I've had the fortune of working with a lot of really smart people, far smarter than me, over the last 30 years. And it's not necessarily the smartest ones that get the jobs if they can't communicate well. You can have everything going on in your head, but if you can't get it out succinctly, if you can't write it out in a report well, and disseminate that information appropriately and easily digestible, doesn't matter how smart you are, doesn't matter if you got a 4.0 your entire academic career, if you can't communicate what needs to be disseminated amongst your group and your peers and particularly your employer, you're not going to go far that way. So I really emphasize any means that you have, just talk to anybody about what you worked on, talk, you know, and ask questions. Don't be shy. Just dig into somebody and, you know, try to peel out of them any information you can and talk back to them and be able to regurgitate succinctly those sort of technical points. So I've had the privilege, and actually it's been a really kind of a weird year with COVID and everything else that's gone on, but we had an ex-UW student from about 4 years ago, Andrew Wilkins, who had been with us for 3 years. Great guy, and he was wonderful to work with, has decided to kind of pursue another career entirely away from physics. So he quit, so we had some openings here, and I got to interview about 10 of you in the last, I would say 3-4 months. And it's actually restored my faith in humanity, jokingly, but somewhat true, that, you know, it's really encouraging to see such a wonderful group of kids that are really engaged, colorful and fun, and obviously know what they're talking about. And so it was actually for a really hard decision for me to choose. If I could have hired all 10 of them, I probably would have. But we have 2 working here now. We just started in the last month and a half, and it's really been a pleasure. I met Ali, came in and interviewed with us as well. He's there, and it seems like he's landed somewhere as well. So I just had a lot of experience just in terms of talking to you guys, and I also recommend highly, you know, my contact information is here. And if anybody just even has just general questions about companies and or people, or just how do I pepper up my resume potentially, just, you know, feel free to reach out to me. I'll gladly help. So with that, I mean, if you guys have any specific pointed questions, feel free to pester me.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions specifically for Ned? What is, in a company such as yours, sort of on what time, how long do people tend to stay? How often are you hiring?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's see, we've been around since what, 99? I've had 2 people quit in that entire time. So I feel pretty fortunate, but again, we're really a small company. That's actually a great question, Marjorie. There's, I sort of, how do I want to describe this? I see there's sort of 3 different types of companies, and this is super overgeneralized, but we're a small company, you know, 12, 15 people total. Then there's mid-sized companies that go from that to maybe, you know, 50 or 60. And then you got the behemoths out there. The style of work and the flavor of the companies are dramatically different in those environments. And what you're asked to do it varies greatly. And I think as a general rule, I think it's always good to get experience in all 3 of those environments if you can, and during your career, just to see what you fit into best, and with, you know, sort of with the caveat that all companies are different. But certainly in a smaller company, this is actually why I revere physicists in particular, is everybody here has to wear many different hats. You know, whether you're calling up a vendor to just buy a screw from, or you're talking to a client about a technical matter, or checking the books, or doing some project management, or down in the lab. I think that's why physicists in particular are really adept at that sort of environment, and being able to, hook and jab, if you will, in different aspects of a job. In a really big company, you tend to get pigeonholed to some extent. There's places like Microsoft, which are wonderful, and they have amazing resources. If you need some really hot new piece of test equipment, it's like a no-brainer for them, right? Hey, I'll drop $500,000 to get a device. Whereas a smaller company like ours, we make do with bubblegum and tape often to get things done, but it works. So that sort of flavor really matters. I think, getting back to your point though, Marjorie, so we haven't had the opportunity, I guess, to hire too many people. Again, I think now we've hired I've had 3-4 interns over the years, and then Andrew about 3 years ago, and now the 2 that we have now. So again, we're a smaller company, so we're talking about 6 people from the physics community at UW, and specifically. So beyond that is people from kind of across the country. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And actually, one question from the chat is a student saying, I have an average GPA, but I can communicate, I'm good in the lab. So how do I sell myself to a company such as yours or someplace else?
That's a great question, because this guy had a really average GPA as well coming out of school. In fact, there's a professor that passed away a few years ago. I'm sure Marjorie or Margot knows Ken Young, who was one of the undergraduate advisors, who told me straight to my face, you shouldn't go to graduate school. And that just pissed me off, and I decided to go to graduate school anyway, and did fine. But that's a really good question. I think being able to disseminate a handful of topics, break them down, and really be able to talk to them well is really a good thing. So when you have your resume, if you've worked on a small project, either with a graduate student, for example, or even a job, heck, if you worked at a garage or done whatever, if you can find something that you put on your resume that you can really detail out in very explicit terms, and hey, there was this problem and I solved it by doing X, Y, and Z, I think that goes a long way. And again, people who are good recruiters and people who are in places where they actually affect who gets hired into their group, having a good communicator is critical. And so, if you can get into that lab, if they're giving you a tour, and typically they will, if you're interviewing, just going in there and being able to say, hey, identifying something and talking to that thing is great. And then, again, and this is something that wasn't so much a problem when I was younger, but nowadays everybody wants you to code, right? So I think it's really cool in terms of what the department is doing in terms of everybody learning MATLAB and Python. I mean, I know you guys probably don't want to look at another screen again after looking at those for all this time, but they are so critical in what we do. Certainly at our company and Microsoft and Amazon and all these guys, they're all using that to control, lab equipment, to analyze data. It's ubiquitous literally in our environment nowadays. I don't know if I answered your question there. Hopefully that helped a little bit.
And I actually just to encourage the student, if your GPA is not wonderful, then don't put it on your resume. Nobody's going to look at it until they've already decided to hire you. And then only the person in HR, all they care about is that you didn't lie, that you got a degree. So yeah, don't worry about it so much. So great. Are there any specific questions for Ned? I do want to give time for the rest of our panel. So I don't see any hands up or direct messages in the chat. So Ali, Ryan, Samir, if you want to just spend a minute or two introducing yourselves, and then how did you get from where these guys are to where you are now? Who wants to go first?
I nominate Ali.
Okay. Sure. Hey guys, I already introduced myself briefly. I graduated back in spring 2020 with philosophy and a physics degree. I took an extra year to get my Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy as well, and I really enjoyed it. So I got out and I spent some time working at the physics department, actually, filling a position for a while. And meanwhile, just with a 5-month contract, I was looking for a job as well. And Ned mentioned it too. He was one of the people that I interviewed with. But eventually I found a job on Indeed and started, applied for so many, but then one of them, they replied to me, and after 3 interviews, they got me. So right now I work as a acoustic engineer for a ultrasound imaging company called Iconis. It's in Redmond, which they after getting the job, I realized that there's so many ultrasonic imaging systems for medical purposes around Seattle. It's a Silicon Valley of ultrasonic equipment. It's been 5 weeks since I started working, and it's been really fun. I don't know, is there specifically something that you wanted me to say, Professor?
I think that's fine for an intro, and then maybe get a similarly brief intro from Samir and from Ryan, and then we'll open to questions.
Yep.
I can go next because I did Ugly Dirty, which is a throwback to when we were in school together. So I graduate, Samir again. I work at a biotech startup called Pathware. I graduated in spring of 2019, just your YE average applied physics major. Yeah, that was about it. I've been working at Pathware. I started working the Monday after graduation there as an intern. I started as an intern. They were hiring when my internship ended in the summer, so they brought me on full time. I wouldn't say don't necessarily expect that of internships at companies. It's very situationally dependent, so grain of salt with that one. But I've been working there for about 2 years. We do a bunch of things, but we're only 15 people. What Ned said about wearing a bunch of different hats and physicists, being really good at it. I work with another physicist, and we are probably the ones who get called in to do all these ancillary tasks the most. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Mostly I work in computational microscopy. So among other things like those ancillary tasks. So that means for the most part, taking some sort of array of images, taking them into the Fourier space and doing manipulation with them. So yeah, Seattle's really good with biotech. It's just insane because of Fred Hutch. And, as Ned said, it's burgeoning industry for optics as well. And it's right at the intersection of those two. So Ryan, all you.
All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ryan Mccauley. I graduated, 2.5 years ago in 2018. And I got my degree in comprehensive physics. For the remaining part of 2018 and 2019, during the summer, I went straight from Seattle. I grew up on the east side in Spokane. So I went back. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I took a lot of physics classes when I was in undergrad. I had taken some of the grad level classes and just kind of peaked in trying to figure out maybe what I wanted to do in grad school. And so I had learned enough to know that I didn't know anything, because I thought that every major, whether it was particle physics or condensed matter, was just so much more material than an undergrad curriculum. So I had a lot of not as much confident myself when it came to applying for jobs, because when I looked at jobs, a lot of them would say we want 5 years experience in this or whatever. And I felt like I was just gleaning the surface and what I knew in physics and everything like that. So, but anyway, a few months later, I was looking at certain types of jobs. I was traveling at the time. And then one person who was close to me suggested education, because I worked in a lab during undergrad, and I also worked for the physics education department. And for some reason, I had never really considered education. And I thought, wow, that'd be amazing, because the UW physics education is one of the the best in the world. I love the tutorial system and everything like that. I took the physics by inquiry classes and love that as well. So I started looking into education, and I felt like it was right up my alley. And it was, I guess that was a lesson in something like always be considerate. I'd go back to Professor Olmstead's page on like all the possible options and just look who is in my situation and like what are they doing now. And I wouldn't discount something that maybe you haven't considered before, because when I started applying for schools, even though a lot of them required teaching licenses and master's degrees, I felt like if you're persistent enough and you can sell yourself with enthusiasm and like certainty that like, yes, I can do this, then I think you'll be successful getting a job. So just as other people suggested, make sure not only that you know your stuff, but that you can sell yourself well, because you could have all the talent in the world, but if you can't sell yourself, then you're not going to be so successful when you're trying to pitch what you can do and how you can add value to other companies or institutions and so on.
Great, thank you. So are there questions out there from our audience, people who are looking for jobs now or thinking about which way to go next? It's hard when you all have your videos off to figure out who's there. Dan, you have a question?
Yes. So my question is, how exactly do you sell like your math skills, especially for Ali and Samir? Because like I would imagine your jobs just consist of a ton of like Fourier transforms and stuff like that. And I'm someone who's also getting a math and applied math minor, but I don't exactly know how to get that across in a cover letter or resume.
That's a really good question. For the most part, from what I've interviewed a couple of people for internship stuff, and I've been interviewed all around. And usually that'll be sussed out. You usually have a behavioral where it's like a normal interview, and then your technical, and your technical is like whatever kind of thing they're looking for. If it's software, they're going to go really hard in software. I try not to go as hard in software because we don't do just software. It's software-based physics. But it'll oftentimes get sussed out in that. And a big part of it is list. So you don't necessarily want to list your classwork, right? List what your classwork is, but try to do stuff outside of the classroom, right? Because that's what you put on your projects and your experiences, and whether that's your research or personal projects or just something you slapped together in an afternoon and thought it was super rad. Put that on your resume, and then like make it a big section, because that's really showing like what you can do and what you have done. And a lot of good interviewers, they'll look at your project experiences and say, hey, tell me more about this X, Y, and Z. And then that's your time to like really show them that your technical stuff, right? Your technical ability. Really and truly, if you don't really know what, like, an interviewer can tell whether or not you are technically proficient and about the project that you're talking about based upon how you're talking about it, based upon the information that you give and like how technical you get into it. And in a sense, that's kind of how you, like, sometimes they might ask you to do some math stuff, but I don't really think that's a thing. Ned can probably answer that better than I can, but yeah.
Yeah, I actually had one interview quite a while back, and this PhD from Cal got a hold of me, and he literally like took every grad level thing and just like, okay, so why don't you give me draw me a circuit that had a differential circuit, I want to see this output. And then the next thing he would do, why don't you write me the expansion of a sine function as Taylor expansion. And so, he just started throwing these things at me that literally had nothing to do with the job. They were designing projectors. So sometimes, so I don't know. It's hard to say. I think Samir's right. Sometimes it's very specific to the job. And if someone's going to just have you grinding on a lot of math, and running scripts on math and doing MATLAB routines and things like that. I mean, certainly they're gonna question you on that. I'm not sure it's necessarily something that is going to stand out in your resume, but I think, look for those jobs where that's important, computational physics, as Samir has talked about. I mean, that's obviously a huge thing. There's a huge trend too in like just data processing, right? Big data, what they call that. I mean, Amazon's got, I don't know how many people over there doing that type of stuff. And I know Microsoft does as well. So I think that's a little more job specific. I know I'm not sure that there's specifically a thing you can put in your resume. Just if you feel like there's something you want to be doing, look for those types of jobs, and just don't be afraid to apply to them. I mean, again, it's as much about the way you come across and your confidence in that one example that you'll show somebody that you've done that will really light their fire and say, hey man, this kid could help us out.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
And sometimes those questions that ask you to do things are what might be called a tree question. They're wondering how far out on a limb will you go? It's really important. And then they'll saw it off behind you. So it's important not to go out beyond what you actually know. It's okay to say, that's not something I've dealt with, but I'm confident that I could learn it within a certain period of time. That's much better than claiming you have something on day one that you don't.
Yeah, don't. I'm going to use some bad words here. Don't try to bullshit your way through something. They'll find you out. So if you don't know something, it's better to say, hey, I don't know. I'm sure I can catch up on that, but I don't know. And don't try to lie your way through something. You'll get sniffed out.
Okay. So sort of in a way along those lines, someone says, yes, I've taken the electronics lab, but I'm not doing so well in it. So how do I deal with that on my resume? Should I be looking for a job that requires electronics?
Yeah, if it's going to be a job where it says like in the first line, electronics work, you probably don't want to apply to it if that's not something you're into. I mean, there's plenty of electronics firms that need physicists, whether you're working with detectors or, there's some other aspect that you're not actually doing circuit design. There's still a lot of peripheral stuff that goes on around the electronics that I'm sure is important. So, for example, what Ollie does, I mean, his whole system is a giant electronics box, but it's right. But he's doing all this acoustic stuff too on top of that. So, and that's where he makes his bread.
I mean, like actually something that I was going to say, it is like a little, the other side of the deal. I mean, like Ned said it pretty well. Like it is really job specific. And like, to be honest, with applying for all sorts of different fields, I ended up like tweaking my resume a little to just make it look nicer for that specific job. That is something that I highly recommend. You don't want to have just one constant file to be sent to everyone. I know it is a little annoying to just kind of like go, but it is worth it. It is, I think, something that paid off for me. I most of my knowledge, all the knowledge that I'm taking to my job, I took to my job, came from my Physics 123, which is like my wave mechanics. I don't think UW Physics offers any undergrad acoustic or sound in general acoustic physics. I don't know. I think there is some physics of music, but that doesn't go that deep into what I'm doing at my job. But like basically all I took was a simple wave mechanics, and they knew about it. And like I was honest, I was like, hey, I have a bit of Python, I know a bit of SolidWorks, and they were like, okay, these are what we're looking for, and we're gonna train you as we go on. And that seems to be working. So don't think that, oh, you need to know every single thing about what you're going to be doing. It's all about, I mean, another thing that I've heard people talk about is like a physicist mindset, like how they're good at looking things outside of the box, how they're good at reverse engineering, how they're like all these things that you learn as a physicist, not like directly in the class, but it comes with all the stuff that you learn and all the environment that you spend time in.
Yeah, you may not think that doing all those problem sets in E&M is worthwhile, but what it has done is it's taught you how to look at something that you have no idea what's going on, break the problem down into parts, talk to your friends who know how to do one part of it, and each of you knows how to do a different part, and you all come together and you end up solving this thing on time and explaining it well enough to somebody else that they can figure out what you were talking about. Okay, so yes, are you going to be actually asked to solve Poisson's equation for some funky boundary condition? No, but that whole process is actually important.
Yeah.
Another question is, what about sort of normal college jobs? You know, if you're working at the library or doing customer service, how do you sell that to a physics job or teaching job or whatever? How do you fold that in?
Yeah, my 2 cents on that, actually, I'll real quick. I'm sorry, Samir. You know, I think actually that's worth putting on your resume for sure. I think, especially if it's the same job you've had for a while. I mean, from an employer's point of view, that says like, you're not someone flaky, you take your job serious. I think that's actually an important point to put out there. I mean, clearly you're looking for something to up your game, you know, to apply what you've learned here. But I think that's absolutely worth doing. Like, you know, you can just talk about your loyalty to that company and how it was good to you, and it afforded me an opportunity to get the education that I got too.
Building on that, I think I genuinely look for these kind of like part-time positions that people do in college or whenever, you know. I'm not judgmental about, you know, someone's circumstance. And like, if you have that position for whatever reason, like put it on your resume, because it really tells the employer like quite a few things, not only about like the not being flaky and whatnot, but it's also like, you know, if you worked as a line cook at a restaurant, line cooks communicate so much. Like, you can't run a restaurant without communication, right? You also need to like be very good at concentrating. You need to be able to juggle a bunch of different things, right? Like, each job comes with its own difficulties. And just because it's not like an engineering job or like a hard science job doesn't mean that you don't have real transferable skills. Like, I would say 60% of my job is sitting in front of a computer writing code. 20% of it is reading research papers and trying to reverse engineer things that optical PhD students did, because they put in the time and effort, and I'm just trying to get it to go real fast. And then like another 20% is sitting in meetings trying to tell my boss, no, this is why we need these specific LEDs on our LED board, or like laser diodes, or like, this is why the image looks funky and we need to increase exposure time by X, Y, and Z. And so like, being able to technical communication is probably the biggest thing I look for when I'm interviewing intern candidates. And like, a lot of these jobs require technical communication skills, and so like, don't discount the experience. In fact, like, I wouldn't put it like top of your resume, right? I mean, everyone's different, but like, have it on there, and don't be afraid if they ask about it to bring it up. And if it's relevant, don't be afraid to be like, you know, and if they're being like, have you ever worked on a team before? Then you can be like, yes, when I was in college, I worked in a movie theater. It was like, yes, when I worked in movie theater, we constantly had to relay back and forth about, you know, different things that were going on, so on and so forth, and, you know, coordinate, shift people around, so on and so forth. So, and leadership, that's another one that people really look for. But yeah.
Yeah, just to add really quick to that, I wouldn't sell it as like a main thing, but for sure, you always want like each job to be evidence for one of the skills that they're looking for. So if they're looking for something like leadership or something like that, any sort of skill that you can demonstrate with that job, I think that you should put it on your resume and put exactly like maybe what you did that, again, provides evidence for the skills that they're looking for. When I was looking for a job, I worked at the Hub for about 3 years. And so just as Ned said, not only does it show that you can do something consistently, but also, as Samir said, it says that you can be doing multiple things at once, because it just adds to your story. Not only were you a student, but you were also had these other responsibilities. So it is evidence that you're multifaceted.
Yep.
Okay, next question is, okay, there's Handshake or Indeed, but what else is out there? How else can you find a job?
So this
I
one
have,
well, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine, go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right, sure. I mean, one thing that like probably one of the main things that I value from spending being a UW student and being part of the physics department are all the connections that I made. Like, I'm just gonna, that word is like, it means so much to me. It has helped me so much in so many different ways, not only for job, but like just having connections has helped me to like find a position in a lab to do research during UW, finding jobs while being a student. You know, basically the connection of me being like close to Margot helped me get through, like have a, you know, opportunity of talking to Ned and having an interview with him. I think Ryan got his job, like, you know, kind of like Margot helped out with, like, I'm not sure, like, was that was a connection as well, or I'm not sure if it was Margot or someone
Not
else.
for the job that I have now, but there was one that she did provide many connections for other potential jobs.
Yeah. So my what I'm trying to say is that, like, you know, just make connections with your faculty, with your grad students that are around, with the staff. You know, it has helped me so much. Like, you know, the current job that I actually have, one of the guys that were interviewing me, I figure out that he knows like a family friend of mine that lives in Boston, and like they went to grad school together at some point, and like I mean, that kind of like, he was like, oh, this guy knows you, I should just, like, I'm gonna go check on him, like, you know, like ask him about you. And like, he was joking about it, but what I'm trying to say is that, like, if you have connections, these can help for sure. Like, that's the biggest thing I'm gonna say before anything else, connections.
Yeah, Ali, I think is spot on. I mean, it's sort of sad in a way that you can't just, you know, rely on the merits of your education and your glowing personality to get everyone to know about you and what you bring to a company. So it's really about knowing people. Sadly, it's true. I've always wanted to try to fight against that myself, but it's an unfortunate fact of life, in particularly in our engineering community. But I will say there's a lot of the Seattle engineering community is super tight. Like, I've never met Samir before, but I'll bet there's 1 degree of separation between him and I. I bet there's one person that knows both of us right now, just in the local Seattle tech community. So yeah, so just along those lines, you know, if you know people at Microsoft has their fingers in literally every other company in the entire Puget Sound area. And to some whatnot. And just, if you know someone, or 1 degree of separation, get an introduction to see if you can, you know, hey, do you know anybody who's doing something like this and that, as opposed to getting your resume on a stack at Microsoft. You know, if you know somebody, that's the fastest way to get into a company by far.
All right, so another question is sort of like, how many classes do I need to take? Do I need to take all the circuits classes, all the mechanical engineering classes, all the math classes? You know, what's the trade-off between taking more classes and getting more experience and having enough time to do my laundry?
Well, I guess I'll start here. You know, you should really try to find what you love to do. Hopefully, you know, this is a really hard one. You're not gonna be able to have everything for everybody. You just aren't. And so you'll do better at things that you naturally like. You're more interested, you'll focus on them, and you'll shine more. So that's a really something like out of a fairy tale. It sounds like what I just said there, but it's true to a great level. I mean, you know, I just loved optics, and for me, it just became easy and second nature. And I really want to emphasize, you'll find those jobs. It may not happen when you're right out of school, but eventually you'll get into that niche that you like doing, and hopefully you're getting paid to do what you like to do. So that being said, you know, there's tons of jobs in mechanical engineering. You know, there's a lot of physicists that do mechanical design. There's a lot of physicists who do, you know, circuit design. Someone Margot knows, Brian Venema, works for us too. He got his PhD at UW a few years before I graduated, and he's basically just doing circuit design now. He's ridiculously better than most PhDs in EE that I know, and but he's a physics guy, right? So, and that's what he ended up gravitating toward. He got his degree in atomic physics, so he doesn't do anything related to that anymore at all, but he really likes the electrical engineering side of things. So do what you like, and the job, you'll eventually fall into the job that you like.
One thing I would also add on to that is, if you like something, or even if you're just interested in something, go out and actively seek out external opportunities, right? There's like the physics department, great. Physics program, phenomenal. But there's something to be said for like doing something in IRL and learning and like getting those like practical engineering chops, right? And that is like another big component of, you know, what classes you can and cannot take. Just if you're interested in something, just go and do it. And sometimes you'll learn something that you won't in the classroom, you know, especially on the software side of things. Learning how to program in at least Python and MATLAB, super useful. If you want to be like super performance focused, go C++, but I'm biased. I use C++ every day. So grain of salt in that one.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point, Samir. You know, with the advent of these the Arduinos, right? I mean, you get these little mini computers that are on drones and doing all that stuff. If you're into that stuff, you know, that gives you an opportunity not only to exercise your wonderful electronic skills, but it also allows you to do your programming skills. And then if you want to put on a drone and, you know, whatever, take video football games or whatever, you can do that too and write about that, you know. And I think that's always, you know, to Samir's point, is having that real life experience is something tangible that you can talk to and point about, you know, as a problem solving set. Again, it really goes a long way with prospective employers.
We're running towards the end of our time, but one other question I think that would be a good one is, for those of you who've interviewed recently, what fraction of the interview was the sort of standard, you know, interview questions, what are your weaknesses, or how did you overcome a challenge, and what fraction of it was actually really technically related to the job you actually have, whether Ryan was teaching a class or, you know, understanding acoustics or whatever? What's that balance in an interview?
If I remember correctly from my interview, when I interviewed, it was about 30-70 technical personal. But I think we've then since shifted to, at least for internships, being more 50-50. I think for actual engineering positions, it depends on how much experience in industry you have. If you've already shown at a different company you got chops, then it's a different story, right? So you're going to be more behavioral. But I think for someone coming out of college, it'll be a little bit more technical, probably more around 50-50, at least in my experience.
Yeah, in my opinion, from my perspective, in my experience, it was a lot more just the employer trying to get to know me. And a lot of it relied on, like, what have you done exactly? But in terms of the technical things, I think a lot of employers also, they understand the reputation that a degree from the University of Washington supplies. So it's not like you have to be prepared for a final exam in all the classes that you've ever taken, and they're going to give you, just as Professor Olmstead said, like a weird boundary condition of like a differential equation or something. The main thing is just they're going to try to get to know you. I think it really is important that you have like your elevator pitch, just as she said, for the real basic questions that they're going to say, provide evidence of this skill, provide evidence of this skill, whether it's from soft skills like dealing with other people, whether it's hard skills from your classes or a lab. Just, I would have that unconsciously down and be able to say, like, with enthusiasm and certainty, like, this is what happened, this is the impression it led, and this is what I learned.
Allie, you've just been through interviews, a whole bunch of interviews in the last 6 weeks. So what?
I mean, I've had interviews that go all the way to, like, you know, only asking technical questions and wanting to know about what did I cover, basically the syllabus of like my E&M classes, like what did you exactly cover, or like, you know, what did you do in this class, like, or how did you, like, you know, what did you do in this lab. But like the current job that I had, basically I had 3 interviews. The first interview was just one, my boss, basically my current boss, basically just getting to know me, and I emailed him after the interview, thanking him, emailed him 2 days later, hey, like, any updates? And then he was like, all right, we're gonna do a second interview with my coworker, which they kind of asked me about, like, my experienced during my research, like at the Professor Blyanov's lab, basically like, hey, what kind of programs have you worked with? Oh, you know Python. Tell us about like a little about like what kind of stuff you've done on Python, like data analysis, collecting data, what have you done? And like, you know, oh, like, you know, what kind of, like, you worked with optics, what have you been doing with optics? There wasn't any technical, like any math questions out there for me. And, you know, the third time, all they wanted to know were about my skills, both like related to physics and just also like being able to work in a lab environment. They were mostly interested in like just, I'm going to say they were mostly interested in me as a person rather than my knowledge, which was surprising to me. But one thing that I want to tell you is that being consistent helps a lot. Like, I was really consistent to get my, like, you know, to get to find a position at like the research lab at the physics department. And I was really consistent with these guys as well, that like I kept emailing them over and over after each interview and being like, hey, so what do you guys think? When am I going to hear back from you? Like, I hope everything went well. Like, you know, just, it doesn't, like, you know, it doesn't hurt to, it didn't, like, it turned out pretty, like, it turned out having a positive outcome for me. So that's one thing that I'm going to recommend as well. Yep.
Okay, one last question is, Ryan, you ended up in Hawaii. Did you just cast a big net, or did you think that Hawaii was cool? And how did you sort of branch out beyond the state of Washington?
Oh my gosh, I can't handle Seattle weather. I grew up in Washington, but I think that, so like part of my journey of finding my job was like when I was an undergrad and I was doing comprehensive physics, like I wanted to be a theorist. Like that was my journey. And so I set up like an interview with like 3 of the theorists at UW, and I asked like, what's your lifestyle? Like, what was your process? You know, I kind of went and harassed some of the other professors of the lifestyle of their job. And a lot of them were like, oh, well, like this area is more limited. So like you have to kind of go where you're offered and things like that. For me, like I really valued like autonomy and to do what I'm good at and what I love. And I love warm weather almost just as much as I love physics. And so when I was looking for a job, I put a filter on for like California, Arizona, Florida, and Hawaii. And the job that I'm at now was I think it was like the second one I applied to. So I would cast a wide net, but I would ask yourself, like, where have you been in the world? What kind of environment do you see yourself being happy in? Because if you're unhappy in like a certain, with like a specific, like there's different cultures of the country, or you could go to a different country. And if you're unhappy in like a specific environment, I would try to shoot for that, and also have some leeway. So cast a decently large net, keep your options open, but just keep both things in mind at the same time.
Thank you. So I don't see more questions in the chat or hands raised, and it's 6:31. Oh. Totally amazing. So thank you very much, Ned, Ali, Ryan, and Samir. It's great to see you all, and you had some great advice for our students. Thank you so much for your time. This is really wonderful. And once we post it on the website, I will be glad to share that link with you guys as well, so that you can refer this, show your boss that you actually did something useful. And yes, so thank you very much. And I'll say goodnight to you all. Margot and Paola, thanks for staying. It's working late. We appreciate that as well. Does anyone have any last comments or advice they want to give students?
Well, I say effective communication is very crucial, and all of our panelists have demonstrated exceptional skills, which have helped them get where they are today. So learn from that, and be open to learning, and let the employer know that you like to learn new things and show excitement, and that'll really help. Thank you guys for coming. Or staying wherever you are.
If I might, on a little bit of a cheeky note, the first thing you should invest in when you get a job, especially during COVID, is a good desk and a great chair. Trust me on this one.
That's well noted, Samir.
Yeah. Wisdom for 2021, I guess now.
Yeah.
All right.
So anyway,
well,
thank you very much.
Sure.
So I'll sign off, and I'll send out an email to the distribution list once we have the video downloaded. Hopefully Zoom has been recording away and everything will be all set. So thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you all around.
Thank you, Margie.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care,
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Good luck.
Bye,
Bye.
Ryan.
Bye.
See you later, Margot. Have a good one.
Bye, Margot.
Bye.
Samir, Ali, all the students.
Wait,
Bye-bye.
Margot,
Yeah.
before you go, I was